the idea of low stress training and training your plants. I think like there's a misconception about what is considered low stress training and what is considered high stress training.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a video out there that says don't top your plants. And I think it kind of plays into this loosely because I feel like you can get a lot done to your plant without unnecessary high stress. But I think in a lot of cases, a lot of us are still using high stress training and we don't actually know it.
Yeah, thinking we're doing, LST or low stress training. And it's crazy how that's a technique, but it's also a description of a lower training technique, like a lower stress training technique. But LST specifically is tying your plants down more, training them to have a lower growth, but at the same time, not stressing them out too crazy, as where some people like myself will actually essentially super crop the plants and they're just bent over and they look low stress trained. At that point, I'm applying a lot more high stress train to it or high stress techniques because I'm pinching and bending and breaking on these plants more than I am just gently bending them over and letting them grow based on, gravity and how a plant would grow. That's a misconception a lot I feel like have. They'll do maybe both low stress train and super crop, but not realize that you are actually having a high stress training technique you're applying to your plant. So the recovery time is going to be different versus that low stress train.
Yeah, exactly. High stress training, you're doing damage to the plant, whether it be topping the plant or fimming the plant, super cropping the plant. You're damaging the plant some way, putting it through a high stress. And with that technique, low stress technique, the bending. I think that the best way to explain is just bending down, not actually doing physical damage to the plant. So.
Yeah, and I think that's where people get confused because they'll tie it down, and if you don't do it early on, you kind of have to super crop to get that form because the plant's too girthy. It's got the girth, and you can't necessarily just bend it and break it. It's not as malleable, so to speak. As where when it's younger, you can bend her over howdy doody, and do your thing, and that's where it takes that low stress training better. Versus when it's older, you kind of do have to implement some high stress training techniques. I think that it's a common misconception when you go and see a plant and it's got the fat knuckle on there. It's like, whoa, that was an LST. Yeah, you tied it down, but you cracked the hell out of those stems too, bud. That's why it took a little longer to veg. And be like, oh, I vegged this one for 3 months. It's like, yeah, you topped it like crazy. You broke her, you bent her, tied it up. This is where it's at. But you can't get a beast out of it. But it's just knowing the difference between LST or low stress training and super cropping. Definitely a misconception. I feel like people, they don't realize that the impact is so dramatically different. While the plant shape could be the same. They're going for that low stress train of the flat pancake, so to speak, or put it underneath a trellis net for a super cropping or super scrogging stone. None of those, just scrogging. I think that makes sense, but at the same time, you just know that, hey, it's going to take longer for that veg because you decided to do the heavier technique.
I think a common misconception about training your plants in general is that it always leads to great things. I'm a huge proponent for training your plants because I really think you can optimize the potential of these plants and their growth and your harvest numbers with training. But I also feel like too much training can be detrimental to your crop as well. If you too many tops with essentially not enough light or the right environment, I think that can really lead to poor bud structure, fluffy buds, lanky plants. Overtraining can definitely be an issue, and I think even low stress training too much, I think that's when it can transition into high stress, and there could be a recovery stage from that.
Well, even looking at pruning, like some people will strip their plants butt ass naked and nothing on there too, and I feel like it's not always the best way to do it. Bro Science says those are satellites, those are solar panels, and they're driving it all in. So there's some of those
That's
things.
not bro science.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like how it's broke down, how I'm like there's science to it. But bro science is like this is our satellite, dude. This is where it's getting old. So like this is really where like I don't think it's a good technique to strip all of your leaves off of your plants. But there is a fine line between defol and like swayzing, so to speak, where like everything's almost stripped off of there. And then when you do it, but I see people who will have, and I myself, I've been a victim of it too, of where I'm like, oh, I'm a lollipop it. Well, why did I veg that plant this long to be this tall and naked from all the way up to here, and there's just stem there? Like, why would I not have done low stress train technique there and bent it down? And then if I needed to with little low hanging crap, then maybe do that cleanup. But otherwise, like, it's a logical fallacy that all that bottom's not going to hit it. And there's no reason to do it. It's like, well, yeah, because you didn't train the plant right. So there is an over and under on training. I think that the biggest misconception is that all pruning is good. or that all topping is good. Like when you do it, how you do it, and how often you do it, I think is the big factor versus just like, just do it. General rule of thumb, keep going, you know?
Yeah.
I've done stuff where it's like I've got a lot of tops, but they're weak, you know?
Yeah, ones that you didn't pay attention to.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned one there about default. I think people kind of use that. It's kind of like everyone's CalMag analogy. It's like, oh, do you default? It's like, well, yes, but it's something that I only really do like once, you know, because stripping or not stripping, but cleaning the plant up and removing leaves is something that I do generally throughout the entire grow. Whether they're leaves that are in maybe too low lying, or maybe they're leaves that are pressed up against other leaves, or they're maybe I'm juicing. That's another thing. I like to take fresh leaves
Steroids.
off my plants and use them for my shakes and my juices. There's a time where it's like you defull your plants, and I like to do that right before I go to flower, where it's like I'm going to strip anything that I don't think is going to be advantageous to me going into the flower stage, and that's going to be those weak tops, if you will, that didn't quite keep up with the rest of them, and I'm just not satisfied that they're really going to bear me the fruit that I'm really looking for. That's going to come off. Those little side shoot, those are all going to come off, and that to me is a defull. And when people say like, "Oh, I'm defull," I do defull, I feel like they're referring to just stripping leaves off their plant as they progress through, not defoliating their plant.
Well, not with a conscious technique either, where they're just doing it. Like where you can tuck it or where you don't need to defull, but like, yeah, less bullshit and more bud. I don't know what, that's where real bro science is where it's just like you just assume that it'll be more bud, like the logic behind it. But that's where I've seen firsthand the whole swaging technique, which is like stripping damn near the whole plant down, and great results. So it's a trip, man, where sometimes it's like, I guess it depends on the cultivar and the growing techniques, but there definitely is a misconception of that you could just train for gains completely without hitting too far of a threshold. I think it's a solid thing too.
So definitely a lot of misconceptions when it comes to training the plants or pruning the plants. And
We got a
stuff
great
like
epi
that.
on training.
We do.
Yeah.
Yep. You can check that out and avoid the misconceptions and get straight to some facts.
This FTS clip was brought to you by AC Infinity, leaders in garden innovation. Use discount code TheStash15 at checkout to save some money on your order.
From the Stash Podcast.